Yay, now we're live.
Yay!
So amazing. Welcome to All Beings Considered. And we have a wonderful guest today, Melanie D.G. Kaplan, who just published Lab Dog. And we are also here with Larrea, fourth-year veterinary student from Washington State University. That's the name of your school. I'm always University of Washington, not a thing. Washington State University.
Yep.
That's the one we're talking about. And so our guest, Melanie D.G. Kaplan, is a longtime independent journalist whose travel and science writing has appeared in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, and National Parks Magazine. She is a graduate of Columbia Journalism School, a 2021 to 2022 MIT Knight Science Journalism Fellow, and a third-generation Washington, D.C. native. Kaplan has lived most of her life with hounds. So, without further ado, let's introduce Melanie D.G. Kaplan to the show. Hi, how are you doing?
Good. I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. Are you in Washington, D.C. right now?
I'm in Washington, D.C., the other Washington, yes.
Yes.
We got them both.
Amazing.
Yes. Except for I'm Washington right now, but I will be at the end of the week.
So congratulations on the book. Larrea finished it. I'm working my way through it. But we want to learn more about you and what got you interested in animal topics. So you grew up, obviously, you're Washington, D.C. native. So you grew up in Washington, D.C., right? What was your relationship like with animals when you were growing up as a kid?
So, we always had dogs around. My parents brought home a dachshund when my dad was stationed in Germany, and that dachshund had puppies. And so, I had dachshunds my whole childhood, but I also really loved my stuffed animals. And I had this connection with, imaginary animals. And I wrote about animals in my little poems. And, they just played a big role in my life. They were my friends. It really wasn't until I adopted Hammy that I started thinking more, a bigger picture about animal issues. He definitely changed my life.
Yes. So you had stuffed animals, but you didn't have other animals growing up, or did you?
Well, we had the dachshunds, and then
the dachshunds, yeah.
Yes, and my mother was an art teacher, and she would go into grade schools, and sometimes she'd bring home, like a little chick that needed to be in an incubator over the weekend, or we had bugs in the house, and back when we didn't realize weren't supposed to put them in jars. So so yes, we always loved animals.
And so, everybody loves animals, but few people sort of dedicate a significant amount of time to them and addressing some of these big issues. So is there something different about you and your experience that led you to develop this sort of special interest in protecting animals and addressing sort of these big issues?
Yeah, I think some people talk about loving animals like, you can love animals big picture, like all of the animals, or you can love one particular animal. And I have loved one particular animal, several of them, but I've had these really deep relationships, particularly with Hammy. And I think, as a journalist, I was able to tell his story and our love story and have that really become a larger picture, because he's representative of the tens of thousands of beagles that are still in labs, for biomedical testing and product testing and education. And so I think, that's really what it was. It was loving him, wanting to know more about him, being curious, and being a journalist.
Yeah, I love that.
For our listeners and viewers who don't know who Hammy is or what Lab Dog is about, do you mind sharing more about who he was?
Of course. So I adopted Hammy in 2013, and I knew that he'd come from a lab in Virginia, and I really didn't know anything more about that. I intended just to foster him, but that didn't last long. And for years, Hammy had this blue tattoo in his ear. So for years, I would introduce him to people and walk him around the neighborhood, and I would tell folks that he came from a lab, and people were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that happened, or I didn't know that was legal. And I kept hearing this over and over and over for years. And I just kept repeating what I had heard from the organization I adopted him from, which is that he was in a lab. He could have been used for drug testing or product testing. I don't have the details, but here's his tattoo. And I realized at a certain point, I need to have answers on some of these things. And that kind of set me off on a journey with Hammy to try to learn more about his past and learn really what the history of dog testing is, where it stands today, and how it's changing.
Yeah. So what gave you that like journalistic mindset? What made you decide to go to school and sort of study this field? And where did you go to school?
Oh gosh. So I have been writing since I was 4 because I
Yeah.
was writing poems then. And I think, my mom always encouraged me to write. She kept a dictionary by the kitchen table, and whenever we didn't know a word, she'd look it up and have us talk about it. And so, I ended up being editor of my high school newspaper, and I went to undergrad at Syracuse University and was really on track to work in TV and radio. And I did all my internships in that area. And then right after undergrad, I worked at a sports marketing company for a very short time and enjoyed it, but realized I just wanted to write more. And that's when I began freelancing. So that was decades ago now. And, probably 7 or 8 years into freelancing, I went back to school. I went to Columbia Journalism School, which really made me so much of a better reporter, and introduced me to, a lot of people who would be really helpful in my network. I took a book writing seminar, which was invaluable. And I put all those lessons to use in this book for sure.
Amazing. So I'm kind of like an amateur journalist, but like I do some writing too. I never went to journalism school or anything like that. Is there any advice you could impart on me and other people who do want to start writing about these things, but maybe can't go to journalism school? What sort of tips do you have for us?
So I'll turn that back to you for a second. So what kind of things are you writing, or do you want to be writing?
So I've written a lot for outlets like op-eds and things about bird flu, especially, which I want to do more of. I've written one scientific article about that you used in your book, or we kind of talk about it. It wasn't published by the time your book was out, but about terminal use of animals in veterinary schools. But I do want to write more about things like bird flu and the existential threat it faces. And I think the animal advocacy movement is totally missing the boat on what a huge issue this is. And I'd like to, and the public is not paying attention to this giant animal welfare disaster that's happening. So that's kind of what I've been photographing, writing about it, and it's hard to pitch, how do you pitch to stuff? I've gotten a bunch published, like Time Magazine, Vox, but I'd like to get better and do more for sure.
That sounds amazing. It sounds like you're off to a good start. And I know this is cliche, but I think the best thing you can do is just continue doing it, continue writing, and reading things, writing that you respect, or writers that you like. I think it's helpful just to get an idea of the flow of articles from a particular publication. If you're pitching them, you kind of need to know their style. And but yeah, just keep writing.
Yeah, just keep going. So in the process of writing this book, how did you go? I want to know the nitty gritty of like how you went about doing it. How many words did you write a day? Like, what do you use Google Docs or, get down to the details of how you actually did this and accomplished this, how long it took you?
Well, I started in probably early fall 2021, and I did not know what I was doing. Even though I'd been through this amazing book seminar, I knew how, I knew what parts went into a book proposal, and that was huge. But in terms of organization, I would do things very differently next time. I was just, making Word documents and thinking, I have no idea where this was going. I had no idea how big it was going to get in terms of documents and data. And I was recovering from a concussion at the time. So all of the papers and, just documents, I was printing everything out. So I didn't have to look at my computer for a long time. So I had these stacks of paper everywhere. I had all these Word documents. I did end up putting the manuscript in a Google Doc, which was hugely helpful. That was something that, multiple people, of course, could get in and help me edit. And then one thing that I did that I would recommend to anyone trying to follow some kind of timeline is to make a really detailed chronology. So I had a Google sheet going back to the 1600s because that's when the first blood transfusion happened, and that was between dogs. And obviously there's not a lot that I need to know in that century or the next century. But, of course, when we get into the 1900s, there's so much that happened with the Animal Welfare Act in 1966 and animals starting to be used for drug testing. And then, when you get to like the Inviga rescue of 2022, I had stuff on almost every single day of this chronology. So it was a massive, massive sheet, and I referenced it all the time. So that's something I would do again. And I would just make sure that the other documents were way more organized than they were this time.
That was something that really impressed me about the book, because you talk in the beginning of how it was really these interactions with people asking about Hammy's tattoo that and you explaining, and also him adapting to living in a home, and those questions of like, what was his life before this, that kind of inspired you to write this book. But it's so you just get into so many interesting topics, and he's this amazing like character throughout the whole book. But then you talk about blood transfusions from the 1800s, and you talk about aspects that he was probably not involved in. How did you go about gathering that information? How did you like generate a list? How did you know what to look for? Or did you just dive in and then see that this was citing this and then go down that way? And also, how critical was the use of like FOIA and state level public records requests in gathering all this amazing information that really shines through in the book?
Thank you. I just really dug into everything possible. I ordered so many books. Just looking at my bookshelf now, I probably have 100 books on this topic that I did not have when I started this. And then, of course, just stacks and stacks of paper. I couldn't even see the floor of my office. So I think my approach was just read everything I can. And of course, each thing would lead me to something else. And I would go down so many rabbit holes. There were some things that I went down that I was like, no, don't need to go here, because, one of them, for example, was I picked up some books on experimentation during the Holocaust. And, there's this idea of, well, what we learned from those experiments, should we be able to use that, because they were testing on, people in concentration camps. And I'm like, oh, maybe I need to learn more about that. And people, some people have made comparisons between animals and experiments and humans in the Holocaust. And at a certain point, I was just like, no, I'm not going to go there. There's a lot that didn't make it into the book, much more than what made it in. And, I found myself at night, like trying to read these books on Holocaust experiments. I was like, okay, that's not where I want to be with this. Not that the rest was easy reading at all, but, that's just an example of something that, I looked at and decided, okay, let's kind of go a different route. In terms of the FOIAs, I did submit some to the university where Hammy was, and I found out that they didn't have his records anymore. But as you know, submitting these FOIAs takes a lot of time. Sometimes you have to be in the state where you're submitting. So if you can't do it, you've got to have somebody else do it for you. And then they come back to you and they say, it's going to be this expensive amount of money for us to get the information to you. So I really didn't do a lot of that myself. I relied on a lot of animal organizations like Rise for Animals and PETA. And, it's unfortunate that we're at a point now. And I recently heard the investigative journalist Will Potter talk about this, where news organizations just don't have the money for journalists to do as deep investigations as they had in the past. And so more and more, we are relying on these groups that have the resources to do this, and this is what they do every day. They gather documents, and having them share those with me was invaluable, because a lot of that information I just wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah. We do a lot of FOIAs too, and it's so valuable. And I really wish more people would get involved in learning how to do it, because it's really easy, but it just does take a lot of time. And, we have our FOIA Friday live streams that we do where we go through the documents that we have received. So how long did this book take you to write, and how many hours a day did you dedicate to writing this?
It's hard for me to break down what was writing and what was research and reporting. I mean, I know that, it was more than 4 years. It was probably 4.5 years from when I first pitched this proposal to get a fellowship, which gave me some grant money to kind of start working on the project. And that was the spring of 2021. So, for the better part of a year, I was really just researching and reporting and not doing any writing. And then I had to spend a lot of time writing the book proposal. And once that was finished, I submitted that to agents. I signed with an agent, which was very exciting. And then a few months after that, I signed with a publisher. And I'm happy to talk more about that process too. Definitely. And then it was really getting back to the research and reporting, because I wanted everything to be in the book proposal, but my friends were like, no, you got to get the book proposal done. This is kind of your sales pitch. And then, you'll know you have a contract and you can kind of move on from there. So, I think when I was writing full time, when I decided, okay, I really need to switch gears now, which only happened because the deadlines were approaching quickly. I was just writing all day, every day, but also in the middle of that, I'd be following up with sources and saying, hey, can you explain this again? Or, what's the latest on this? Because things are changing all the time. So it was, I absolutely did not have a set schedule. The worst weeks I would get up at 4:30 in the morning and start writing. And I would finally close my laptop at 9:30 at night. I would just be falling over. And that was right before a deadline, which, I had many of those.
Yeah. Wow. I'm in the book proposal process, and it's like, I did not understand what a book proposal was. It's like 100-page document basically. And your marketing plan, all of my chapter summaries are all there and everything. But now it's like, okay, I know what I'm writing. All my chapter summaries are there. Start your first sample chapter and everything. So after and then were you talking about the process of getting a publisher for this? What was that like? Querying agents? Do you have to query agents and do that whole thing too, or was that?
I did. Fortunately, I have a friend who has an amazing agent in San Francisco, Danielle Svetkoff, and she represents a lot of authors that work on science books. And so I had pitched a couple other agents who'd been recommended, and they passed. And I remember it was New Year's Eve or New Year's Day that I heard back from Danielle, and she said, "I've never worked on a dog book before, but she was, she was willing to give it a shot." And she said, "I just want to be realistic with you. This is a tough topic." And, she wasn't sure she'd be able to sell it, but we started working together, and she really helped me refine the proposal so that the marketing section was better. I worked on the comp section. So that's, mentioning other books that are similar. And, of course, nothing will be exactly like your book, because otherwise you wouldn't be writing it. But, you could say, well, it's going to be in the style of this, but it's going to be this instead. Or, it's going to follow, the narrative arc that this author does in this book that's totally unrelated. But you're just giving publishers an idea of, what this is like. And then they look at the comp titles and they see how many books those sold. And, of course, you have no idea at this point, but you're coming up with, as best you can, your sales pitch for your book that doesn't even exist yet.
Yeah. So how is your book doing out there now that you've got it out? Is it like you expected, better, worse?
Oh, I think I was afraid to even have expectations about this part, because it was such hard work every day. And, it's a little bit surreal. You're kind of in this hole working by yourself. And, I was in total isolation for a lot of it because I just had to be. And then you come out and you kind of give birth to this book, and it's out in the world. And instead of just writing by yourself, you're out talking about it. And it's really exciting. I've really enjoyed the in-person events. I've done a bunch of events in DC, and I've got some stuff planned for other cities next year. And, I really appreciate just, why it's important to get out and talk about it and engage with people and answer questions. And it's, if I had been brave enough to dream, I think this is exactly what it would have looked like.
Amazing. So has there been any backlash from the book, from the industry? I imagine that they don't like some of the things you say.
I have not heard anything from the industry.
Okay.
And as I did talk to a number of researchers and some research organizations, and, I don't know if they've read it. I hope that they have, and I hope they reach out. And, I wasn't sure what to expect on that front either, but my approach during this whole process was letting people know that I want to be open to all these stories, not just on one side or the other. And I think that's the only way I was able to really tell a narrative that feels true to me.
I feel like that really came through in the book and you talk about that as you're narrating this journey. And it really seemed like you're kind of trying to figure out how you felt about the whole situation, from knowing that all of us benefit from the science that has come from animal testing, but then also having this really deep relationship with Hammy, as well as other dogs that you knew who were rescued from labs. So I'm curious about that strategy that you're talking about, of talking with people, and what were some of the most effective ways of talking to researchers and laboratory workers or former industry insiders to speak with you on the record?
Yeah, it was important to me for a few reasons. I mean, first of all, because I'm a journalist and I felt like this is my duty. I mean, this is what I need to do, is hear the different sides of the story, because, it's really nuanced. I mean, it is complicated. None of us are going through life saying, I'm not taking drugs anymore because they've been tested on animals. I mean, sure, we can buy cruelty-free products, but it's more complicated than I think most people realize. and more complicated than some groups would want us to believe, I think. So, I think the other reason is that I wanted readers to decide for themselves how they felt. I didn't want to come into this saying, okay, here's what we need to do, and here's my strong opinion, and this is how it's got to be, because I don't think people respond very well to that. And, I read one book when I was early on in my research called Zoo Story, written by Tom French, which is really a wonderful narrative about these elephants that came over from Africa, and they ended up in a zoo I believe in Tampa. And he really spends a lot of time at the zoo getting to know the animals and the caretakers. And it's quite a dramatic story, but, he doesn't say, like, he really lets the readers decide, like, how they feel. So, and I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Oh, I mean, just kind of how you went about engaging in conversations with people who might maybe think that you feel a very specific way because you have Hammy, and
yeah. I remember very early on, I spoke to a laboratory animal veterinarian, and he said, he's basically like, let me give you a tip. Don't use the word rescue when you talk about him. And I was like, oh, I hadn't really thought about that, because he said that would be a red flag for researchers. And so I did really, I was careful in the way that I spoke, and I let them know that my goal was to hear from both sides. That it was important to hear their stories. And fortunately, a couple people who spent their careers working with dogs, experimenting on dogs, were open to talking to me. One of them did not want his university or his name used. And, I think that a lot of them are scared. They know people who've been harassed, or they've experienced it themselves. And I was just thankful that they spoke to me. I mean, their stories are really important. And, the lab animal veterinarians that I spoke to, I felt really good about being able to share their stories as well as Hammy's story. I mean, they don't often speak up. I don't feel like that they have, the place to really share how they're feeling, especially veterinarians who are more concerned with ethics or working to change things. I think that they often, and of course, so much more about this than I do, but, they have to be careful what they say in the workplace, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. They face backlash and retaliation if they speak up. Do you think, activist campaigns, like animal activists are like, what do we do about this? And the tendency is always go and protest and yell and scream. Is that effective? What would you think? What would you like talking to all these people and how they feeling? Is there a way animal activists should engage that you think is more productive, or actions that they should do that would be better? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's tough. I do think that it's really important to bring the two sides together. I mean, that was kind of one of my dreams when I set off to do this, is that, and still is that this book would be part of the discussion around this, and that both sides would be reading it. I think in terms of activists, people will continue doing their protests and demonstrations. I don't know that it reaches a large audience. But at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of work that animal groups do that's hugely important. I mean, we would have not seen the inside of Vigo, or, Humane Society around that same time did an undercover investigation of the parent company, Innovative, and we would not have seen that. And, as painful as it is to see these videos, they really can lead to change, because nobody else is seeing the inside. No one else, they're not showing us what happens in there. They're not talking about it. So, there's really important work that's happening, but, I particularly like what PETA is doing with their science advancement and outreach, because they are going to these companies and organizations and really coming with a scientific approach on this, and how can we use the NAMs, the new approach methodologies, to, phase out animal use. And so, I think that's something that researchers can hear and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And you explore the 3 R's: reduction, replacement, and refinement, and the rise of these alternatives. Where do you see that there's the greatest systemic resistance to adopting these new methods? And what concrete policy change do you believe could accelerate their implementation?
Yeah, so the 3 R's came out of a book that was written in 1959. So that was a long time ago, and we have learned so much since then. And yet, in labs, they're still talking about the 3 R's. Like, this is kind of a not new thing, but this is like the bar that we need to reach, is doing the 3 R's. And that's frustrating to hear, because, once I learned about, it's called the Principles of Animal Research Ethics, that talks about some higher bars that we could reach, like, saying, okay, if there are no other alternatives to use, then we might be able to use animals. Or, there's got to be an upper limit to harm with these animals, which there is not today. So, it's these other principles they're introducing that could be a starting place to discuss what might replace the 3 R's. And the other thing I'll say is that the 3 R's, doing this extra work, providing toys for dogs or little mazes for mice or enrichment for pigs, that doesn't happen when staff is cut and funding is cut and people are overworked. And, I feel like some labs might see that as kind of extra or bonus. And it's not, where we've got so much funding that's been cut with science right now in labs. And so I think this is a really dangerous time when the welfare of animals in labs might be getting worse before it gets better, or before those numbers are reduced.
Yeah. I attended this talk about the 3 R's, and it was this person's premise was, we've reduced animal numbers too much, where now we have this replicability crisis where we're not able to repeat the study. And the replicability crisis is the fact that there's these inherent problems with animal research. We're testing on highly stressed animals that are not in natural environments. So that's what the problem. But the industry's answer is, well, we need to increase animal numbers in order to help solve this replicability crisis. And I really hope we combat that narrative that's going on. Have you talked to anybody who has successfully, from the inside, implemented changes that led to drastic reforms?
So Dr. Margaret Landy, who's in the book, she worked at a major global pharmaceutical company for decades, and she really did make changes. She made people more aware of the ethics, and she really improved the welfare of animals in the lab, and at a big scale too, not just in one lab, like all over the world. And then she went on to teach ethics at the UPenn Veterinary School. But I think the latest is that they might have cut the ethics class, which was really distressing. It just seems like we need to have those ethics classes from the beginning in veterinary school, with any of these researchers in the early days. And I don't know if that's happening on a regular basis. Have you taken ethics classes?
So that's something that I've brought up multiple times, both at my school and then just more broadly, and trying to figure out why there are so few schools that have an ethics or a welfare. So the AVMA sets the standard for what curriculum have to have, or what schools have to have in their curriculum if they are to be AVMA accredited. And having like welfare and ethics it's not highlighted in their requirements. My school recently went through its reaccreditation, which they all have to go through. And I was the student representative on the curriculum committee, so I was privy to a lot of these documents, and I got to read our entire proposal that we sent to the AVMA. And yeah, it's not a checkbox. And I feel like it has to start there. The AVMA has to be the one, and they don't. Like, they have their principles of ethics, but I think a lot of change could be made if they made it a requirement for schools to have X amount of hours. So I had a 6-week course, one semester, or like one day for like 1 hour a week for 6 weeks. Once in my first year and then again in my second year. But then I went to kind of a weird program where I did 2 years at one university and then finished off my last 2 years at another university. And my cohorts in the Washington, so I started in Utah and then moved to Washington, and my cohort who were spending all 4 years in Washington, they lost their professor. And so they just didn't have the ethics course at all their second year. And like, even within my program, there was a lot of inconsistency. And in both schools, I feel like it's just interesting because there is now a specialty. You can become boarded in animal welfare, and schools don't feel the pressure to need a boarded animal welfare specialist teaching these courses, where in every other course, our internal medicine course is taught by internal medicine specialists and cardiologists and neurologists, but there's not the expectation that this is taught by a boarded person. In my school, it was taught by the wellness director, like the school counselor taught it. And I don't know, it was a little baffling to me.
Yeah. There's just not enough boarded welfare diplomats yet, I think. I don't know how many there are, but it seems like a very small group. So yeah, that's.
Yeah, I think like you said, just making this a requirement and starting this early is really important. And then back to your question, Crystal, just about the 3 R's and what will it take to change that. I mean, I think, again, we've got to start really early. It's like these postdocs are trained to experiment on animals, and then, let me see if there's an alternative, if there's something else we can do. Whereas if we flip that on its head and say, okay, we've got all of these non-animal methods of testing. We've got AI, we've got computer modeling, we've got organoids and organ chips. And, oh, darn, we just can't do it with any of these things that we have. Then let's see if we can, do some animal research, which the bar would be incredibly high for doing that. But, right now, the default is just let's go to animals, because these animal labs are set up, and the animals have been purchased and they're there, and this is what the researchers do, and what their grants are intended for is for animal research.
Maybe it needs to come from IUCOOC. Like, if they had, like how vet schools really needed to come from the AVMA to set their curriculum standards, maybe research. Is there another governing body maybe that would be more effective if they created the standards?
From what I understand, the IUCOOCs are at each institution level, so I don't know if there's a broader governing body, except that, these grants, that is changing, because the NIH now is requiring all of these grants to have some NAM component. They can't be animal only proposals. So that's huge. I mean, if that is shifting, and the NIH is not giving only animal experiment grants in the future, that's bound to change things.
Yeah, I think that's huge.
Yeah.
So how do you recommend people, like, talking about animal experimentation to the general public is really challenging because most people like don't want to hear it. What is your advice for people who do want to kind of talk about these issues? How do you broach these topics? And do you talk about this with your friends and family, or do they not really want to hear it? How's that been?
I'm sure my friends and family are tired of hearing about it right now. But it has been interesting, these book events that I'm doing, because these are members of the public who I don't know, and they show up and they ask questions, and people really do want to know what they can do, because the worst thing is to hear about something like this and then feel helpless. And so, the first thing, of course, is to read the book and talk about it. And talking about it means, just letting people know that this is going on, putting stuff on social media, and, writing to people who do have a say in this. So writing to lawmakers, state and federal lawmakers who also might not know what's going on. I'm lucky because in Maryland and Virginia, there's some really active state senators who have made this a priority, particularly with dogs and research. But, they both told me their stories, and before they found out about it, they had no idea. I mean, they were shocked to learn. And, we have 50 states. And so we've got laws that can be made in all those states saying, we don't want this research to happen in our state, or we don't want these products for sale in our state. And, it takes a long time for these things to pass. I mean, there's bills year after year after year. But I also know that these offices do look at letters that are written and emails and calls, and they record them all. Of course, people can shop cruelty free. They can really think twice before they buy a bug spray or an ant killer. There's so many of those pesticides out there, and things we don't even think of as pesticides, really. And they're all tested on dogs. I mean, there's a 90-day dog test that is required for every pesticide.
I didn't
So
even
that's
know that.
pesticides that are, put on crops, and pesticides that we put in our yards, and that the lawn companies spray on grass, and antimicrobial wipes, because that's considered a pesticide. So, yeah, just thinking before you purchase these things, I think that's really important too.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I don't know. I was talking to somebody else, and they were saying how their school got more letters from veterinarians who were in support of keeping terminal laboratories for students than they did get from veterinarians who were opposed to the practice. And that's where we're just not communicating with these vet schools about these practices enough, while the people that want to keep the status quo are communicating. I think all of these pro animal research groups are reaching out actively to their politicians to make sure that these practices are protected, because they view it as essential. And I think, as vocal as we are not doing things in a strategic way, reaching out, writing letters, and letting our voices be heard enough. So I just want to encourage people to do that. But also, anybody who has worked in STEM, we all had to go spend our time in an animal lab doing research on animals, and many of us were horrified by it, but we just don't talk about it. Like, the fact that people just don't know that this is happening is kind of outrageous to me, because there are literally hundreds of thousands, millions of students, graduate students, who are working in these labs and hate it. I've talked to so many people who are like, yeah, I wanted to be a neuroscientist, but then I ended up experimenting on rats all day long and realized I did not want to spend my life like this. So then this brain drain happens in the field, and we lose brilliant scientists because they don't want to test on animals, and they end up doing something else. And I think that's something that's lacking. And so there's millions of these stories out there that people are keeping in their heads and keeping to themselves and not sharing this with the public. And I hope maybe your book will be a catalyst for them to engage in more conversations with their friends and family about what they experienced in a lab when they had to do this, or why they ended up leaving the scientific field because they didn't want to test on animals. What do you think? What are your...
Yeah, no, I hope you're right. And, I mean, this is why the work that you're doing is really important. It's funny, I was telling someone that I was going to be talking to you and about the terminal surgeries at vet schools. And they said, well, we don't kill humans to teach students in med school. So why do we need to kill animals in vet school? And, I think when you say to people, oh, well, they still need them in vet school because they've got to learn how they got to learn the way around a dog's body, for example. And, they have to do these surgeries. You don't want them doing a surgery on your dog for the first time. People are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But, when this person made the med school comparison, I was like, yeah, exactly. I mean, we do not kill humans in med school to show med students how it works. We have these awesome simulators, and we've got these super high-tech methods of virtual reality learning and different surgeries. And then they, practice with an attending, and, there's a whole way of doing it. We figured it out, so we don't have to kill people.
Exactly. And human medical schools don't even kill animals in their student training anymore. They used to be, and that's what a lot of veterinarians think, oh, that the medical schools are practicing on pigs, but they're not. And I think, there's so many myths out there about the way the world works, and these little justifications of oh, you don't want them practicing on your dog, right? And then people immediately go, oh yeah, that's right, and then kind of move on with their life instead of engaging with that question a little bit longer. Right. And that's what the industry relies on, is people to not really to take that first response, that first justification, and then go, oh, it makes sense, and this is the way things are, and then move on.
Right. And it doesn't make sense to me with all the high-tech stuff we have now and all the training methods. I mean, I talked to some vet schools, and some of them are so creative in coming up with these really inexpensive ways to practice surgery. I mean, almost like using a mouse pad and doing sutures on that, and for very, basic, training. And then, they've got these Sindaver dogs, which are incredibly lifelike, and, you can do all kinds of things on that and practice, practice different procedures and do surgeries, spay and neuter surgeries, and they don't need real animals. It's we can do this. So, I mean, I think what I'd like for the book, and I do get pretty deep into veterinary education in the book. I would love to go talk to vet schools. I would love to have them read this. I mean, maybe you and I could go talk to vet schools and, just really explain what's happening, what's possible, what we've learned, because to your point, a lot of people are afraid of speaking, and, and that makes me sad. We shouldn't have this in the dark because people don't want to talk up.
And I think people don't know how to talk about it too. It's a lot like women talking about sexual harassment and retaliation. I'm one of my heroes, Monica Lewinsky, what she went through was horrifying, and people were making jokes about her, and she was 22 years old. And this man was president of the United States, and she ended up being the villain in this. And it's but nobody knew how to engage back then with this conversation that should have been had. And instead it was just these jokes. And I feel like that's where we're at with animal experimentation and animal exploitation. We don't know how to engage in these conversations. And I think the more people hear people talking about these things in the way that they should be spoken about, in the way that your book does, I think the more we will advance the conversation. People have to get used to hearing how people discuss this. Yeah. What do you think, Larrea?
Oh, I have so many thoughts.
Yeah.
First, I loved how much you went into all of the examples of simulations and models in the book. My school does both. There's terminal labs, and then we also have a really great clinical skills simulation lab. And I would say the majority of students get a lot of surgical training through the simulation lab, and we have it as part of a requirement in our curriculum to get hours. When I was being trained to spay dogs, we had to pass on a model. We had to do everything in the sim lab first and I felt very, very adequately prepared when I did my spay on a shelter dog. Mm-hmm. And then we still have a large animal surgery elective that I've discussed a lot with my school as part of the curriculum committee, and then just advocating to the administration and to the faculty. And because there was a lot of, even with it being an advertised elective course, there was a lot of secrecy about it. Everyone knew that there was a terminal goat surgery. Mm-hmm. But then I had a friend who, she was extremely conflicted about it. But she felt like the learning that she would get from this course was going to be worth it in how many animals she could help later. And so she made peace with this one surgery that she was going to have to do. And then after they finished the goat surgery, the next unit was to do surgery, to learn surgical skills on horses. And it was just sprung on all the students that they would be getting all of these ponies from a neighboring institution and that they were going to be terminal. So one week they would do a surgery, the next week they would do another surgery, and then the third week they would do an abdomen. They were doing limb surgeries and waking them up, and then the final week they're going to do a full abdominal explore and then euthanize the ponies. And the students didn't know about it before they enrolled in the course, and it wasn't anywhere in the syllabus. And so even though the school is not going to do away with that course entirely, and they shouldn't do away with the course, but they're not going to make the majority of the skills based in the simulation lab, even though we have some really great large animal models. I think this last year, it was the last year. I think in part due to there were letters that were written that I had asked vets alumni to write letters. I spoke with the Veterinary Information Network, VIN, and they did a whole kind of story about terminal surgeries, and a lot of it was featuring my school, and they felt some pressure. And so I don't think they're going to do any terminal surgeries on horses anymore, but they're still going to do the goats. But they did tell me that they were going to at least tell students when they were signing up for the course that this was an expectation.
How kind of them.
And that it would be in the syllabus, which are just like minimum. Yeah, so that's my experience with it. And it's been very slow. And the administration has been really great to work with, but they're just very incremental. And a lot of it is because they got a lot of backlash from students who are excited about this course, who think it's necessary, because of the myth that, well, I don't want the first surgery doing this on a client-owned animal. And it just made me think about all of the vets out there who are asked, especially rural vets, who there's no other option. They're the only ones. I was listening to a podcast episode of recently of the veterinarian Michelle Oakley, who she's had a Nat Geo show. And she talked a lot about how there's no option for referral in the rural places that she was doing. And so she would call an equine surgeon to talk her through like a tendon surgery. And it's the first time she's ever doing it. And it's a big part of her job. And there's so many vets who do a surgery for the first time, and people have to know that and be consenting to it before they let you do that on their the animal they're taking care of. But it's such a myth that this one surgery is going to prepare you to be a good surgeon. Because, my friend who went through the course said that because they were terminal, maybe people were a little less careful than when we were doing our surgeries on animals we were going to recover. So that's the big thing that I really want people to stop using that argument, because it's a big reason why people become veterinarians instead of doctors, is that there is more freedom to new, to do what you can, even if there's, you're not the boarded specialist, but you're the only option around. Like, you're going to do it, even if it's the first time you're trying. And it's one of the great things about veterinary medicine. But yeah, so it just should not be used as the excuse for keeping terminal surgeries.
Yeah. And all these students, there's so many animals out there who actually need help and need surgery, and they're not getting care because their people can't afford it.
Yes.
How much benefit could we give to society if all of these students got the chance to learn on these animals under the guidance of experienced surgeons? These animals aren't getting botched procedures by students. When you have an experienced veterinarian watching over you, stepping in, making sure everything's going okay, it's a win-win situation for the animals, for the students, and the students get to see their animal wake up from anesthesia, practice post-anesthesia recovery, and talk to their client about how to care for their animal afterwards. Those are valuable skills that they're missing out on with these terminal surgeries. So yeah,
I feel like it's a duty of state-funded institutions to provide that service. And I see people getting turned away, especially for emergency service, because they aren't able to pay for the gold standard, and the university says, well, we're just going to do it the gold standard. And I have a different view on how publicly funded institutions should be serving the public. But
when they're spending money purchasing animals to kill for their labs,
it's one of the most expensive courses that the vet school runs.
The pony lab?
And I've never seen the budget, but a professor who left running that course to create the clinical skills lab told me that it was a very expensive course for the university.
Melanie,
it's definitely changing. I mean, in the book, I get into some of these vet students in the 80s who were like, oh, no, we are not killing dogs in this course. And they boycotted it. They drove all over to try to find cadavers from veterinarians' offices to use those in the course. And they ultimately, had led the administration to making changes. But Crystal, I was amazed reading your paper, how much it's still happening at the vet schools. So, I think we need a new generation of activists in vet schools speaking up about it. I mean, it's really traumatizing. I talked to a number of veterinarians, decades into their career, and they still were very upset about what happened in vet school, that they had to, in some cases they were euthanizing a dog and breaking her leg and then fixing the broken bone, waiting for the dog to heal over a number of weeks, and then euthanizing the dog. And, it's like, now we look back and we're like, oh my gosh, this is completely senseless. But, I think you're right about, providing this care to people who can't afford it. Or that makes me think of some of these clinical trials that I write about in the book, where people have pet dogs or cats, and there are trials set up, just like human clinical trials, where they can treat a certain type of cancer, for example, that, they're looking at an experimental drug or repurposing a human drug. And so you bring your dog into the clinic, and they often get free care and free scans and whatever's involved in this treatment. And, it may or may not help that individual dog, but it might help future generations of dogs, or it might help humans. But, the point is there's so much of that we can be doing. There's, whether it's cancer or some other disease, the students have to learn some way. And we've got millions of animals out there experiencing symptoms that need help. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say we spend $24 billion a year on animal experimentation, and we spend $38 billion a year Americans spend on veterinary care for their animals. But so many people can't afford veterinary care, and these animals that they can't afford care, they end up in the shelters, where the shelters and the municipalities end up having to care for them. What if we just expanded access to diagnostics for everybody? You brought your dog or cat into the vet and they had a upper respiratory infection. Instead of being like, well, we'll skip out on the PCR test because you can't afford it and we'll just give some doxycycline and hope for the best. What if there was a government study so we can figure out epidemiologically what respiratory viruses are infecting all of these animals? Like, how much further would we expand medicine if we just looked? Because there's a saying in medicine and in science, if you don't look, you don't find. And we are not looking right now at all. We're investing too many resources, I think, on vivarium-based testing instead of epidemiological testing. And the bird flu virus is a perfect example of this. We've tried to infect cows with bird flu in the lab and failed multiple times. Meanwhile, they go out to a farm that is infected and they test each individual cow, which there are very few scientists actually doing this and very few dairies allowing this. And they found out so much more about how it was transmitted out in the field than they were in trying to replicate it in a lab. And so that's what I envision the future being like. We need to redirect funding to invest in epidemiological research and those clinic-based researches like you talked about with these clinical trials, instead of confining animals in labs and doing that.
All right, well, yeah. I think we figured it out, actually.
I think we solved the problem.
Maybe we just need to get the NIH to only fund those kinds of studies then, instead of vivarium studies.
I love it. And I think we can get all the animal lovers on board who are struggling with the cost of veterinary care. Be like, hey, did you know that these agriculture dairy producers are getting their veterinary care subsidized? Don't you think your care should be subsidized too? I think so. So I love it. So what's next for you in this book? What are the next steps?
You know, I've got more events set up here, and then I'm going to be traveling in the new year, and you know, just continuing to talk to groups. I've got some university talks set up, and like I said, I'd love to do that at vet schools. So
I love it.
You know, I think that there's a real story there, and so we should talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. Let's plan on it for sure. Where can people find you? Where can people find the book if they want to?
So you can find the book anywhere that books are sold online. If you do buy it from Amazon, please leave a review. I'm told that those algorithms are important. And you know, my website is my name, Melanie D.G. Kaplan.com. And there you can find all the updated events and my previous writing. There's a whole section. I think the section's called Dogs and Other Animals, or maybe Dogs, Pigs, and Other Animals, because I've been writing about animals for quite a while. And then I'm on all social medias.
Awesome. Well, check it out, Lab Dog. It's amazing. Thank you so much for being on our show, and we will be in touch and talk about outreach to vet schools. I love it. Thanks again.
Thanks so much for hosting me. This was a really fun conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It was so great to meet you. I got to have a fangirl moment.
It was so great to meet you too.
All right, talk to you later. Oh, that was great.
Oh, she's so lovely.
Yeah. So what's going on in your life, Larrea? I'm
on a tiny little bit of a break, and then back to clinical rotations. And I have just a few more at the teaching hospital, and then I have some away, get to do my preceptorship and some go into some other places, starting to apply for an internship and figuring out job things afterwards. And yeah, just counting down the days for the next 5 months.
Yeah, honestly, like I don't know. I wouldn't spend. I think the day I graduated was like the day I ended up figuring out where I was going to work. So
Yeah.
no pressure.
I'm not
Like
too
I
worried
wouldn't.
about it.
Yeah.
There's so many options. I mean, there's a part of me that hopes everything that I apply to falls through and that I can just travel around and freelance and do clinics. And there's so many rural towns that I have connections to that desperately need vet care. Like my sister works at a clinic in rural New Mexico, and she mentioned that I'm almost a vet, and they're like, yeah, bring her down anytime. We need more vets. And
literally.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think that would be really great. And just trying to get through. There's some aspects of it, but there's some aspects of being at, I don't know if you felt this way when you were at a university hospital, that just, I don't know, kind of going off of this topic, that the line between medicine and animal experimentation is really blurry. And it all comes down to like the way it's communicated to clients. And I mean, my passion is in animal welfare and providing a life worth living. And, maybe it's my background in wildlife rehabilitation. And I don't know, maybe I just have a really high bar for what a quality life looks like. But I just feel like sometimes we're doing procedures to buy time that just are really medically interesting, but I don't know how great it is for the animal. And some of it is people not wanting to let go and being happy that there is an option to do more. But I find it very like emotionally heavy and complicated dealing with those situations. I don't know if you had similar thoughts and experiences.
This was my thought at UC Davis as well. I saw so many cases where they were investing $50,000 in the care for their animal. And I'm like, this is not inspiring me at all.
Yeah.
This is not good. And I would have to communicate with these people and did not like it. And I felt boxed into a corner and like felt like it was betraying my conscience. And but getting out into the real world and working at a community clinic and being like, this is what we can do here. If you're not down with this realm that we can offer, you have to go to a specialist. But I have no interest in prolonging the life of an animal who I like. This is too much.
There's suffering.
Yeah.
So I think that's the hardest part. And what's really interesting, and it kind of makes me think of some of the points we were talking about with Melanie, of we're not alone in feeling this way. It's just a lot of people are not speaking up. Like you go into the student lounge and I'd say 80% of the conversations are students being like, yeah, this animal I feel like is not getting enough pain meds, and I feel like we actually do a really good job at my school, but I feel like the students are the ones that are doing the more like nitty gritty day to day and are doing the assessments, and we're not really necessarily empowered to like make suggestions. But I am inspired by hearing those conversations of the average veterinary student is really concerned about the pain management of their patients. And a lot of them are concerned about the quality versus quantity of life of their patients. It's just because we're in this hierarchical structure and we're the students that, and a lot of people, they just want to get through, get their letters of recommendation and be done. And it takes communication nuance to be able to ask questions of your superiors in a way that doesn't feel challenging and that feels genuinely inquisitive.
But that's also a problem with the system where there's that friction in that is embedded in the system of the subordinates unable to articulate their feelings about the organization, the school, the system, and communicate those. There's that friction, and how do we resolve that friction there? That's a barrier. Yeah.
And I just don't want people to get the idea that veterinarians, are cold-hearted and doing these things to animals, or even researchers, like Melanie was saying, of how, laboratory veterinarians and researchers, they do want to speak up and say things. But there is this system that normalizes things. And, but it is really nice to hear the conversations of, the average veterinarian or veterinary student really cares about these issues. And that's really nice to hear. And it also makes me, I don't know. It's the other thing that comes up a lot is a lot of these vets are small animal, so dog and cat focused. And I think a lot of the time they're self-selecting out of a system that is harsher to animals. And so then it makes it harder to change the systems in the equine world or the farmed animal world. But I hope that it can be viewed, instead of it being this, people just want to live in the cities, that's where the jobs are. There's a big rural veterinary and a big farm animal veterinary shortage. I feel like that's the narrative that's getting pushed. But I think the real reason for that is that students are selecting out of that system because they don't want to perpetuate the treatment of animals within those systems. And I just want people to start thinking about these shortages in those in that sense, so that maybe we can, I think a lot of people would stay and work with these animals if the system wasn't so brutal to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so many people love farmed animals, and I talk to a lot of students who are like, I want to get into farmed animal medicine, and I'm like, I can tell you have no idea what you're getting into, but I'm going to root for you. Stick with it. Follow me. Like, the farmed animals need you. But I also think that your chances of sticking with farmed animal medicine are not there. So what do? I think all of those people who have self-selected against farmed animal medicine and gone into companion animal medicine, you need to know you still have a voice. You have a perspective about farmed animals. And so use that. And I get this on social media all the time. Like, I will speak about the pinnipeds, and I posted a video with a pinniped showing very anxious behaviors. And I learned about anxious behaviors. No, I'm not a trainer of sea lions and seals, but I can still learn about this. And I've still talked to many zoo vets and wildlife trainers. But people comment, well, how much time do you spend with pinnipeds and in your daily work? And it's like, and this gets to veterinarians too. They're like, oh, if I don't have those letters after my name, if I'm not an expert, then I don't have the right to comment on it. And it's like, yes, you do. You absolutely can comment on whatever. You have the tools to research and to speak, and you went to school to learn things, and every day you confront something different, and you have the skills to address those different situations that you confront, and you can apply that to different species in different contexts. You know what questions to ask, you know how to approach these problems. So do it. Don't let this perfectionism of like, oh, I need more letters after my name and then I can speak out, or I need this job and then I can speak out. No, use your voice now.
I think I fall into that trap. I messaged you the other day of like, I want to apply to talk to this conference, but I don't graduate, the conference is in February and I don't graduate until May. Like, what am I qualified to speak about? And you're like, you're qualified.
You're literally, more than any of the other people at that conference, I guarantee you, you're more qualified.
And And I think it's because we're in that system that we think that way. And I also wonder if it's the same. I would love to hear from people in other countries if your vet degree is taken more seriously. I mean, I don't know if you can compare to the US, but someone who we should have on is Dr. Chloe Buting, who is a wildlife vet, and she does a mixture of clinical and non-clinical work. And she shared it was a presentation or a TED Talk about that another vet had who left the profession and is now a like strategic analyst. And she created a talk called like how your vet degree is your passport or something like that, but just that we learn so many skills. And like this person, she became an equine specialist, and then she left the profession and is now basically doing strategic analysis and consulting for like big companies, because those were the same skills that you develop in vet school, is asking questions, analyzing a situation, coming up with hypotheses, and then, testing them through diagnostics and then solving a problem. And so Chloe has been a really great person to talk to, because I feel like I'll reach out to people doing non-clinical work and they're like, well, you need a PhD, whether it's wildlife work or you need to become a specialist. And she made the observation that might be true in the US, and that, we're very like siloed in our specialties and require a lot of extra letters. And she's like, you're a vet. You are so well trained to use your brain to solve problems. Like, you can be a program manager for any number of these wildlife conservation organizations, or, whatever it is. And I don't know what it is.
I love that.
But she's a great one to talk to about that, because she's doing it, and she doesn't have a PhD. And but I've talked to vets in the US, and they're like, well, you definitely will need a PhD or a couple of board certifications to be important.
I feel like as you can do so many different things, especially working like in government. Like, there are so many opportunities just as a vet. And even like me, I wrote a research paper and I'm not a PhD, and we can collaborate with others. Like, you can reach out to like, hey, I don't have a PhD, but you do. Let's collaborate on this. So there's so many. And all of the people who are writing the guidelines for the depopulation of animals, do you think a lot of them work with those animals on the day-to-day basis? No, they look at research papers and they talk to people, and then they draft these guidelines. One isn't even a veterinarian and sitting on the panel on depopulation. It's like, what? So and I think that's just have the audacity of a white man, of a mediocre white man.
That's what I was going to ask. I was like, how do you reshift your thinking?
Just look at all the examples of men without doctors, without doctorate degrees, who are doing what you want to do. And being like, of course, I have the right to be here. So,
So that's the goal, is to just figure it out and get out of the trap of the vet school. Because it is funny thinking about, especially doing like rural medicine work or working in places who don't have access to a specialist. And I feel like even right now, even though I haven't graduated yet, I have the skills to make a really big difference and to be a good clinician. But then when I'm in the teaching hospital environment, like, I feel like I have to play the role of being totally clueless and inferior. And I don't know, it's been a weird mind thing, especially because before teaching, like, I have a master's before vet school, I was a teacher. I had my own classroom. I like ran the whole thing. I helped start a school, and I've just feel like that. Like, I have a master's in teaching, and then when I'm in the teaching hospital, it's just, I'm just another dummy,
another little minion.
And I'm like, I have skills and experience, and it's interesting to take a step back and just like analyze what it feels like to be in that space compared to other times in my life, because I'm a non-traditional student. I had a whole career before this, and
yeah. Literally, I volunteered for another organization where it's like, I'm a veterinarian, and that organization treated me like I was nobody, like I had no expertise. But I realized, oh, that's part of the manipulation, really. And that's the way, and everybody else who is teaching there went through what you're doing, and they feel like, oh, that's just how it's supposed to work, instead of challenging this idea. And this is what we have to do as vets: challenge, is this really how it's supposed to be? Sure, there's a paper saying that this has to be this way, but what kind of questions are asked? Are we really asking the right questions? What are all the things that need changing in order to make this whole system run better, more smoothly, with less friction, less resistance to change? These are it's so frustrating too, though. It's like, okay, you got to pick one thing to work on. What's the thing that we're going to work on and change, and that's going to give us the most bang for our buck? So
yeah, and that's the struggle, is figuring that out.
But
what do you think it is?
Well, I think the next plan, I mean, there's so many things, but I really got to focus more on this terminal labs and vet school thing. And I think we didn't do this because it was easy. We did this because we thought it was going to be easy, sort of thing. I think it's not going to be too challenging, but we just haven't focused the effort that is needed yet to mobilize veterinarians, write the letters, send in the stuff. And we will start doing that shortly. And getting more attention on this topic, because I think most people would be horrified to learn how backwards veterinary medicine is.
Every person that I talk to, because I think that, this is a difference, is I think maybe classmates don't share, like, that was a crazy messed up thing that I witnessed. And maybe they do.
We can't process it yet.
But I tell everyone, and I don't know, maybe I don't have like the same social filter. And I do feel like I'm good at like knowing when it's the time to bring it up. But I'm not afraid to say, hey, yeah, I saw this is crazy, right? And I haven't met someone outside of the veterinary profession who I bring up, oh, what are you working on? Oh, I'm writing a letter to the dean, or I'm setting up a meeting with the dean to talk about how it's not listed in the syllabus or anywhere in the curriculum that this lab has terminal surgeries. And then they're like, oh, what's that? And then I explain it. I have not met a single person else, including medical professionals. My mom's she's a nurse practitioner. Like, I know a lot of doctors, like, they are all blown away that this is happening still.
Yeah. And the gaslighters will say, well, because you're explaining it in a very biased way.
That's what they told me in the curriculum meeting. Yeah. Another student was like, I'm here to represent the rest of our class because this is very biased. And I just had to sit there, and I was just like, it made my blood boil.
No, that exists in so many, like, women voicing concerns about sexual harassment, sexual misconduct. That has happened to me in so many things, where it's like, you say, I've talked to so many people about this, and they all agree with me that what happened was really wrong. And they'll be like, well, but those are your friends. Of course, they're going to agree with you. And like, you explained it you didn't, adequately tell his side of the story. And it's like, oh my God. Yeah. And literally it's like,
side of the story. Does that not count for anything? Yeah. It is. Lots of gaslighting all around.
Yeah. Well, this was great. And we are doing a talk tomorrow at Long Island University. So that'll be fun. And yeah, I'll see ya. I guess we should close this. Any final thoughts
Just
before
to
we end the
know if
stream?
there's any other vet students listening,
Yeah.
reach out. If anyone wants us to speak at your vet school, we are excited to do that. We're talking at a vet school tomorrow. Crystal's been talking to lots of vet schools all year long. And yeah, we're just excited to hopefully we can get Melanie to join us talking
That'll
to
be
vet
fun.
schools. And yeah, we're just excited to have people listen and let us know how we can help you in your animal advocacy goals. If you ever need a veterinary voice, let us know. And
absolutely.
We're there.
And we have a wonderful matching donor through the end of the year. So your donation is doubled. If you haven't donated yet, go to ourhonor.org/donate. Venmo @ourhonor is also a possibility. So please support our work, support our travels to veterinary school so we can get this information in front of vet students and amplify this message and make real change. Because I think that's the key. If we get veterinary students to be able to change their curriculum, then the rest of the harmful practices will fall away too. So get involved, go to ourhonor.org, ourhonor.org/donate, join us, email me at cheath@ourhonor.org or info@ourhonor.org. And yeah, we'll see y'all next time.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Bye.